Now to the sermon titled On the Fast Track. On the Fast Track, with reference to the two passages that we listened to, one from the Gospel according to Mark, the first part of that Gospel, and one from the Gospel according to the author that we know as John. First 5 verses from that Gospel. This is the fourth and the last installment of the themes that the Adult Christian Ed team or committee identified that we should address as core principles of a non-fundamentalist approach toward the Christian faith. Some people will call it a progressive Christian faith. And we will continue the conversation after the sermon. You're welcome to join us in the parlor. We'll ring the bell as normal, and then we can continue. And let me also say I've been very encouraged and very impressed with the kind of conversations that we were having after the previous three sermons on other themes. Today on the fast track, if we look at the theme as identified, it says that a non-fundamentalist approach towards Christianity finds grace in the search for understanding, and places more value on asking questions than on posting absolute certainties. Now that's a mouthful, and I don't think I understand it properly, but I like the sound of it. It finds grace in the search for understanding. The understanding is not the problem for me there, but the term grace. Because I think it's one of those terms like hope that we easily speak of and very frequently speak of it in the Christian tradition. But it's a nebulous term, and it lies, I think, a bit beyond our understanding what grace is. I try to achieve some understanding by saying to myself it is something that is a gift that makes a real difference, that is given without merit and unexpectedly, and in a way that is beyond understanding. It is something that we cannot grasp, God's grace. So for a non-fundamentalist Christianity, we find that unexpected gift that makes a difference and that is life-giving for us in the search for understanding. And we value asking questions more than posting absolute certainties. I think once one starts to think some about the world, both the physical world and the world that we live in, the societal world, the human world, and also as it relates to nature, one cannot but come to the conclusion that almost the only constant, and this is no original thought, is the only constant is change. And this is nothing new. This is no revolutionary thing that Einstein or somebody else thought up. I still remember my philosophy professor in my first year, my first encounter with formal philosophy, which was hard for me to learn of all the old Greeks and what they thought and so forth. He was quitting smoking his pipe then, Professor Dreyer, a very learned man. I think he had 4 PhDs in different fields. So he taught us with a stick in his mouth to resemble his pipe that he that he couldn't smoke. And he spoke, I still remember using the Greek words which impressed me at that stage because I haven't learned any Greek by then. Pantarei, everything flows. And he said there was a Greek guy that lived more or less 450 years before the birth of Jesus in the city of Ephesus. That was his basic line. Everything flows. And Heraclitus was also the philosopher that coined the phrase that we like to use today, you can't walk into the same river twice. Because it changes. So even then, somebody that looked at life said, the only constant is that it changes. And if you look at what some people call chaos theory and systems theory, there is a direct correlation between the pace of change and the information being fed into that system. The more information it receives, the faster the pace of change becomes. And it is indeed the case that we live in an era with a proliferation of information. Much of it, unfortunately, is unfiltered garbage that's dumped on us and that we acquire and that we like to read in many cases as well. But the effect of it is that our society is changing at an accelerating pace. That is the nature of systems, and we see that demonstrated in our world as well, the world that we live in. The fast track of the title of the sermon refers to that, but more so to our physical world, the cosmos that we live in. If we look at the two ends of the spectrum of the natural world, the very small stuff, subatomic world, and the cosmos, the mega stuff, the universe or multiverse, take your pick what you want to call it. We see that there are almost no certainty. And even Einstein, when he formulated his theory of relativity, was a bit scared of what the implications were of what he just formulated. So he brought in a constant into his work so that it is more digestible, I think. But when we look at the universe, it is on a fast track, an accelerated track of expansion. It doesn't seem like it, but we're all on the fast track. This thing is drifting apart. I think with what we know at this stage, that in the first trillionth of the existence of the universe that we know, some call it the Big Bang, it expanded rapidly, very rapidly, and then that acceleration slowed down, that expansion slowed down, up to about 10.8 billion years ago. They did some research recently, and I say recently, a few years ago, that confirmed, yes, it slowed down. But then at 7 billion years ago, it picked up again. And it is still accelerating, the pace of expansion. And it's difficult to understand the implications of that, but one implication of that is if we were able to live long enough, if you would look at the sky, you would see nothing. It would just be dark. Because the constellations would be so far apart that we wouldn't be able to see anything. I don't know what that has got to do with anything. But it's never interesting to me that you would look up at the sky in this universe and you're on the fast track and there's nothing to see, just darkness. I think the other fast track that we are on, unfortunately, is the growth in the deficit of our increase in scientific knowledge and the contribution of Christianity in the meaning-giving project to respond in a responsible way to what science reveals to us about our universe. The increasing deficit, the accelerated deficit in the meaning-giving project of Christianity to respond in a responsible way to what science reveals to us about the cosmos and about the world that we live in. We have abdicated that responsibility in a stupid animosity towards science. So science is no longer asking us, what do the church say about this stuff? What ethical guidance can you give us? There is, I think, as I say, a growing deficit in that regard. We have let our people and we've let the world down by not stepping up to the plate and saying, this is how we will work with science. When science explores the universe, we will tend to the meaning-giving part of it. Because we cannot leave it to science to provide that meaning. It will reveal an impartial, a cold, and probably an alien universe to us that is uninhabitable to us. We need to step up and fill that void with meaning to create a place for us where we can feel at home in the universe. This has not always been the case, that there was a deficit and no development in the understanding and in the meaning-giving process. Continuous change and faithful tending to the process of meaning-giving and growth in the understanding in Christianity was part of our tradition. The two passages we listened to illustrate that. They were written about, make it 50 years apart. Some people will say 150 years, but let's settle on 50 years by different authors. Mark first. And if you listen to Mark, there is no birth story of Jesus. Mark just steps up, typical of the Gospel of Mark, and says, all right, Jesus was born, and there was this guy, John the Baptizer, who prepared the way for him. And he quotes Isaiah and said, this is what Jesus did. And then he carries on with the story. About 50 years later, more or less a generation later, the Gospel of John sees the light. What does the Gospel of John says about the birth story of Jesus? It's an elaborate story. You can go and read it. It takes it back to the origin of the universe. In that span of 5 decades, you can see how closely the leaders, the thinkers in the Christian church, tended to the meaning-giving process. As the information grew and as the world changed, they prepared a different story about Jesus, presented it differently to a different generation. I think we need to honor that part of our tradition. I think we need to place value on the questioning. And we have to realize that whatever absolute we want to formulate about God, to say that God is thus or God is thus, with absolute certainty, is probably something that we will have to revise at some stage. That our absolute answers and certainty of today will become questions by tomorrow. And that doesn't call for an easy existence. And we therefore have to, as Christians, fulfilling our responsibility in this meaning-giving exercise in the universe to which God has called us, to fill the void with meaning and not to throw ourselves and fellow human beings into the cold existence of an alien universe. We have to become comfortable with journeying with uncertainty, questioning, but also finding grace in it. We have to journey in relationship. In the first place, in the relationship with God, giving ourselves fully to live in covenant, in agreement with God, that we will be God's people and that we will seek to do God's work in this universe, in our journeying together. We will have to journey in relationship with one another, thereby confirming the very essence of our universe, that everything is relational, especially everything human. We have to acknowledge that, accept it, and give ourselves to journey like that. We also have to do our questioning in a life-giving way and not in a destructive way. Not to wade into the sacred text, for instance, and tear it apart in a negative way and say, this is all nonsense, it doesn't have anything to say for us. Our enlightened, bright people living today, look how stupid they were in those days. No, I think they had more wisdom, quite often, than we have today. We have not only to place more emphasis on the way that we journey together, but we also have to find our certainty in the purpose of our journey. That purpose, again, I think we should seek together with science in a mutual project, a mutual endeavor, to work with science, where our purpose would be to formulate that responsible response, a life-giving response to what science reveals, and for us as Christians, even more so, to walk together and to be the light of the world, to be manifestations and embodiments of God's love, and our final purpose, to make the kingdom of God visible in the world. That is what I think we are called to do as we journey, as we question, as we find God's grace, so that something of God's grace may be channeled through us, because we as God's people have experienced something of God's grace. May the wisdom of those that went before us and their commitment to be present in the world, helping each other to find meaning and purpose in the world as God's people, may their examples speak clearly and strongly enough to us so that we walk in the same way together into God's future. Amen.